Pleased to be joined now by Mark Brewer. He is an attorney at the Goodman Acker Law Firm and the former chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, joining us now on the MegaCast to talk about election law and some proposed and discussed changes that may be up for discussion here in the near future. Mark, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Tyler.
Appreciate having you on. So there's been a lot of discussion about fairness of elections, about equity in our elections, from both sides of the aisle, both from the Republicans and the Democrats. It seems to be that the current status quo is that Democrats want to find more ways to provide easier access for people to be able to get to the polls and have their voices counted, and the Republicans seem to want to find more ways to put into place measures that require further identification, to take multiple steps for one person to identify themselves as being who they are in order to have their vote counted and still maybe even be questioned after that. At this moment in time, what is the most important question that voters should be asking of their political representatives at the state level and at the federal level in regards to what is being discussed in terms of our election fairness currently and in the future?
Well, boy, I think there's a lot of important issues that we could talk about when it comes to elections. The one that I'm focused on currently is a proposal called the National Popular Vote. I don't know if your listeners know, but, we're great believers in democracy in this country for hundreds of years, right? Whoever gets the most votes wins the election. It's that simple. But actually, there's one office in this country where that does not apply, and that's the President of the United States. The president is not elected based on the total number of votes he or she gets nationwide. And that's something that on a bipartisan basis, former Republican Chair Saul Anuzis and I are looking to change through this proposal called the National Popular Vote. We need to change to a system, which I think is supported by the vast majority of voters out there, that whoever wins the most votes nationally becomes president. It's that simple. No recounts, no fights over hanging chads in Florida, no lawsuits. Whoever gets the most votes by campaigning in the entire country becomes president.
We're joined by Mark Brewer. He's an election law attorney with the Goodman Acker Law Firm, as well as the former chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, with us today on the MegaCast. And for reference, the two most recent incidents in which a president was elected by the Electoral College despite not winning the popular vote were of course, in 2016 when Donald John Trump was elected president, and in 2000 following the Bush v. Gore case in which George Walker Bush was elected president over then former Vice President Al Gore at that time. And so in terms of a national popular vote and that sort of change, there seems to be two schools of thought, because on the one hand, the Electoral College was put in place in order to, theoretically, in order to prevent major cities and major population centers from being what ultimately decide elections. You don't want to have places like Chicago and Los Angeles, Detroit, Phoenix, Dallas, superseding places like Billings, Montana, and ultimately rendering their votes not ineligible, but irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. On the other hand, the Electoral College was also put in place because, to some belief, the Founding Fathers and those that put the Electoral College in place didn't believe that the American people were smart enough to make the right decisions. So, on the one hand, you want to make sure that you're counting everybody's votes as equally as possible and making sure that no one group of people, whether it be a city, whether it be a certain population, have their votes be heard in greater mass than others. But at the same time, you want to make sure that the person that the people are electing are the people that ultimately end up in those offices, especially an office as important as the president. So how do we work that balance into a national popular vote but that could potentially take over the Electoral College?
Right. Well, first, several things. It's actually happened 5 times that we have had a president elected who was not the majority vote winner. So this is a serious problem, given that the country so strongly believes in one person, one vote, and majority rule. And what we're proposing respects what the founders did in 2 important regards. First, we do not abolish the Electoral College. The Electoral College remains in place. Secondly, the founders believed in federalism. They said we trust the states to decide how to allocate their electoral votes. And so the national popular vote is an agreement among the states, state by state, deciding that we're going to elect the president by a popular vote in the future. And so what Solonuzis and I are proposing is a ballot proposal on which the voters of Michigan would vote, straight up, yes or no. Do you want to elect the president by a national popular vote, or continue the current system, which has had these 5 major incidents where the majority didn't prevail? It's resulted in recounts and litigation and lawsuits and disputes. It's time to move beyond that and elect the president like we elect every other office in this country. The person who gets the most votes wins. So we believe this very much respects what the founders put in place, because it honors letting the states decide. And look, we have a much different set of electors, voters today than we did 2 centuries ago. Much better educated, believers in majority rule, believers in one person, one vote. And so it's time to make this important reform to the Electoral College.
We're joined by Mark Brewer. He is the former chairperson of the Michigan Democratic Party and is an election law attorney with the Goodman Acker law firm, joining us on the MegaCast. And you mentioned, and something that caught my ear, was that the Electoral College, in the case of a national popular vote being mandated, that the Electoral College would still remain in place. How would that be so, and in what capacity, then, would the Electoral College be playing in our national elections?
Well, it would remain in place. The electoral votes of the states would go to the national popular vote winner. It's that simple. It would reinforce the idea, again, of majority rule, one person, one vote. You mentioned earlier this concern that somehow this is going to let cities outweigh the votes of suburbs and rural areas. No, cities in this country are not as big as the totality of the rural areas or even the suburban areas. And what this actually does is level the playing field. Right now, Wyoming, a voter in Wyoming has much more impact on who becomes president than any voter in Michigan. That's not fair. This levels the playing field. It says every voter, urban, suburban, rural, whoever they are, wherever they are, their vote is going to count exactly equal to everybody else's. And it then puts the burden on the candidates to go out and campaign in every corner of the country, which they don't do now. They focus on a handful of states. They ignore the vast majority of the country, whether it's rural, suburban, or city. This will say to them, now there's a premium on getting every vote you can find in every corner of the country. Go out and do that. I think it'll dramatically change our elections. It should increase turnout, participation, and interest, because we truly have a national campaign for president, not a campaign for president in just a handful of states.
So in that case, the Electoral College, and correct me if I'm wrong in this situation, the Electoral College, all of the state's electoral votes would then be allocated based on the winner of the popular vote in, for example, the presidential election in that state. Would then each state have one electoral vote, or would that still be weighted based on the population of one state versus another?
All the Electoral College votes would remain weighted the same way they are.
Okay.
1 per congressional district, 2 for the senators. So the number won't change, but they will be cast in favor of the national popular vote winner. And again, so what will happen here is every vote in every state by every voter will get totaled up, and whoever gets the most votes, the Electoral College will be instructed to vote for that person. Done. Majority wins every time. End of disputes, end of fights, end of lawsuits. And we have a true majority rule, majority election for president.
We're joined by Mark Brewer. He's an election law attorney at the Goodman Acker law firm and the former chairperson of the Michigan Democratic Party, with us on the MegaCast. If you're just tuning in and want to hear all of this, a really interesting interview about the potential for a national popular vote and about the National Popular Vote campaign. You can view this interview on demand later on today at civiccentertv.com by clicking on our MegaCast link at the top of our homepage on your computer web browser, and by scrolling into the drop-down menu on the left side of your screen if you're viewing us on your browser on your mobile phone. And Mark, you mentioned multiple times that that part of the draw for this national popular vote campaign is that it would reduce the frequency we have of recounts and of disputes of one state versus another, and strategic disputes to try to delay elections like we saw happen in so many cases in 2020, particularly being from the Donald Trump campaign for re-election. But at the same time, if these recounts are if these votes are being counted specifically by a popular vote, if states are being determined specifically by a popular vote, wouldn't it then make each and every vote more important to campaigns and maybe open the door for more frequent recount efforts in certain counties to ensure that one candidate versus the other, especially in close elections, has actually lost by that narrow margin? Wouldn't that encourage that more?
I really don't think so, because I think what will happen here is that there will be a clear national winner, and that'll have to be taken into account. I mean, if a client comes to me and says, Mark, we lost by X votes, I want to do a recount, but we don't think we can make up X votes. I said, well, then you're wasting your time, right? So instead of, the entire country watching hanging chads in Florida, because it's come down to a few hundred votes in Florida, we will look at the big national picture. I think inevitably there will be a clear winner, as there has been throughout our American history in terms of the popular vote, and that will be the end of it. Sure, there still will be options, Tyler, for recounts and disputes, but again, it'll be very clear based on the national results who has been elected president.
We're joined by Mark Brewer. He's an election law attorney at the Goodman Acker Law Firm and is the former chairperson of the Michigan Democratic Party, with us on the MegaCast today. And in opposition and in reaction to discussions on the National Popular Vote campaign, let me just find this out. Republican activist Tori Sachs had, from the executive director of the Michigan Freedom Fund, responded, quote, "This is a terrible idea," and closed quote, and then continued on saying, quote, "This disastrous proposal would make issues voters care about irrelevant while centering political power and decision-making in the nation's biggest cities where liberal elites have assembled en masse," and closed quote. She had said that earlier in a news release. What's your reaction to that statement from Tori Sachs from the Freedom Fund?
Well, again, those are just talking points that aren't based in reality. The vast majority of voters don't live in cities. They live in suburbs. They live in rural areas. There are big Republican states like Florida and Texas. Everybody can point to an example. What she's invested in is the broken status quo. The status quo where a person who doesn't get a majority of the vote can be elected president. A status quo where we end up endless lawsuits, endless recounts, endless fights over who should be president. This is a much simpler, more democratic, with a small d, way to do this, and it's got bipartisan support. Solonuzis, former chair of the Michigan Republican Party. There are a lot of Republicans in Michigan that support this. There are Republican legislatures and Republican elected officials throughout the country who have said that this is the right thing to do. So, we started today, Tyler, talking about all the partisan discord. This is a great example of partisan agreement across the aisle. Democrats and Republicans like Solonuzis and me say it's time to make this important reform.
And just in reference, in the past 3 elections for each in which each party has won, the popular vote margin, 7 million people roughly for Joe Biden in 2020, 4.9 million, almost 5 million for Barack Obama in 2012, and almost 9.5 million for Barack Obama in 2008 for the Democrats. Republican side in the last 3 elections, Donald Trump in 2016 and his victory lost the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes. In 2004, George W. Bush won re-election in the popular vote by over 3 million votes. And then, of course, the very controversial 2000 election, less than 1 million votes, actually less than 550,000 votes in the popular vote was the margin in that election. Mark, just a few more minutes with you today before we'll say goodbye. If people want to learn more information about this campaign, or they want to ask questions about how it could affect their state here in Michigan or other places in the U.S. where this is being campaigned for, where can they find more information? Who should they be speaking to get some of those questions answered and have some of these debates?
So we are just getting rolling with the campaign. We just filed our petition last week with the state, getting it approved as to form before we can start circulating. But if folks want to go online, this is a national movement. It's called National Popular Vote. It's been adopted in 15 states and the District of Columbia. So they can go to the National Popular Vote website and find a lot of great material there. And again, it's been a long-term effort. It was adopted in Colorado just 2 years ago. So there's plenty of information online. And as the Michigan campaign develops, we'll be putting out materials here or have a website and so forth where people can come and explore this, and we hope support it and sign our petitions.
So, Mark, before I let you go, it's really interesting. You've mentioned Saul Anuzis throughout this interview, in your campaign and his campaign joint together for the National Popular Vote Initiative here in the state of Michigan. You're, of course, former chairperson of the Democratic Party here in the state of Michigan. Saul Anuzis is, of course, a Democrat. So you're political rivals in that sense. How did the two of you come together in this campaign here in the state of Michigan on this issue?
Well, look, Saul and I have been longtime rivals, opposed each other many, many times over the years, but I've always admired his political skill, and I'm always looking for an opportunity. It'd be great to work together on something, and we found something, the National Popular Vote Reform Movement, on which we agree, and we think it should be adopted on a bipartisan basis, so it's really been a great pleasure working with Saul, who I told you I respect greatly, on something that we can't agree on because we disagree on about 95% of everything else. But again, it's a great bipartisan reform, sorely needed in this era of such partisan rancor and disagreement. And we hope people will unite behind it and we can move the country forward on this important reform.
Well, Mark, we appreciate your time, appreciate your insight, and giving us some information, at least initially, on the National Popular Vote Initiative here in the state of Michigan.
Thank you very much for having me, Tyler. Great to talk to you.